So, once upon a time, there was a woman who lived in the countryside and loved little more than cats. Eventually, there was a point in time at her peak where she had 13 cats living inside of her home. But her love extended not only to cats, because she couldn't really turn away any animals, and so the backyard was full of dogs, too. Dogs from the neighborhood, dogs who just landed there, decided her food was better. And the inside of the house, in addition to the cats, there were also a number of relatively petrified rodents. You see, she had grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and many of them at one point in time thought it would be a good idea to have a small rodent pet. And eventually, some of them grew disenchanted and loved their little rodent pets a little bit less, and so they ended up at Grandma's house. And she couldn't say no to animals, and so all of a sudden, she had the 13 cats, she had a pack of dogs in the backyard, and she had this burgeoning number of rodents, all different kinds of rodents. And then one day, she disappeared. No one knew exactly where to, no one knew exactly why, but all of a sudden, the cats and the rodents and the dogs, they were left alone. And as cats are wont to do, the cats quickly assessed the situation, and they realized that their survival would depend on their dominance among all the other animals. And so they crafted ways to control the dogs. They kept the dogs in a pen outside, and they created a mind control tape that they would play at night while the dogs were sleeping to keep them docile and servile, and the dogs seemed relatively happy. The cats assessed all the food that they had. Luckily, the lady, she bought food in bulk, and so she had a whole stockpile of food. But they planned ahead because they realized that one day that food would be gone. And so they decided they wanted to cultivate, get more and more of the rodents. So they let the rodents out, they let them be free-range rodents. The entire house became a habit trail for the rodents. Guinea pigs and gerbils and mice all climbing around this whole house. And the cats were unnaturally kind to the rodents because they were planning ahead for the day when the rodents would be their meals, and so they would walk right up to them and kind of poke their side and be like, "I hope you're not exercising too much. You look like you could use another snack." And they would bring the rodents snacks, and the rodents grew pretty afraid because they could see the food supplies dwindling. And they knew that one day it would be them. So they got a little worried. But they couldn't break out. Because you see, the dogs, they had created large walls around the farm, and there was no way to get out and past the walls. The dogs were being used to cultivate rows and rows of the finest catnip, and the dogs would keep the rodents inside the house if they tried to break free. But one was extra crafty, and he waited till the middle of the night when the dogs were being subliminally controlled by the cats. He snuck out through this one tiny little crack, and he ran as fast as he could, and he ran all night long because he figured somewhere, somehow, there would be an answer. And luckily enough, this farm was in upstate New York, close to a number of very fine colleges. And the next day, there was someone in town doing a presentation and having a large speech, and the rodent kind of crept up onto this huge assembly of all these people. Bright orange robes glistened off in the distance, and there was a number of guys on the top of the stage kind of weebling back and forth and chanting these low guttural voices with and so the rodent knew that something was going on. And he climbed up onto a statue and he looked over, and then a just beautiful, amazing, really brilliant looking guy came out and he sat down in the middle. And the rodent, English was his fourth language, but still he understood just enough to glean from the talk that this man gave, that the gist of what he was talking about. He said, "Love your enemies," he said. "Love all beings," he said. And the rodent was confused because he was going for an answer. He was on his way looking for an answer. And all of a sudden, love your enemies, love all beings? He couldn't imagine a way that he could go back and tell his rodent brethren and sisterin that they could embrace the cats, that they could embrace the dogs. But somehow the man spoke so much truth that he decided he would. So he ran back all the way back to the farm, waited till night, snuck back in, and that night started telling the rodents, "I'm pretty sure the only way we're going to survive is if we love all of these guys. If we love the cats and love the dogs." And they almost laughed at him at first. But the next day, the food was gone. And the cats' usually benevolent looks turned a little bit hungry. And they turned on the rodents and they started walking towards them. And one rodent just walked up, opened his arms wide, and planted this huge hug in the middle of the fur belly. He was shaking inside, but he planted this big hug. And he said, I love you. And the other rodents, they took the cue and they said, okay, let's try this. And they all scampered over to another cat and they all opened their arms wide and they all hugged. And they said, I love you. And the cats had never seen or felt anything like it and they were so taken aback. And they felt love course through their hearts also. And they said, I would prefer that I didn't, but I think I love you too. And they hugged the rodents back again, and there was this big hug, and the cats were so inspired. They even went outside, and they turned off the mind control stuff on the dogs. And they opened their arms, and they said, we love you too. And so there was dogs and cats and guinea pigs and mice all just hugging. And it was the craziest love multi-animal special fest they had ever seen. And from then on, they carved a whole new way of being. They still didn't realize that they needed to also try and love birds, but that came later. For now, they loved one another and they broke down the walls and they started cultivating food that they could all eat, started hunting together, started living together as one, and they knew that that love was for all beings. Amen.